if last time was answering the questions, this is questioning the answers. So I just want to give you three proofs, three evidences for the Christian faith. These have like big theological, philosophical terms. I'm not going to give you those, mostly because I don't know what they mean. But let me just kind of give you three evidences for why you can believe in God. Two of these are going to lead you to theism. So they're going to lead you to like the existence of God. And then we're going to get to the third one, which is going to lead you to the truth of the Christian God and Jesus. All right. So just know that with the first two, if you're like, but why the Christian God? These are going to stop short. They're going to give us more theistic, God does exist. And then with the third one, I want to convince you that in light of that the Christian God is the one who is true. So the first one is the case of morality. The case of morality. The main question with this is, if there is no God, what basis remains for objective good or bad, right or wrong? That's the main kind of question you're asking someone if you're trying to set up this moral argument. So this is not responding to their question. This is putting forward, okay, hey, if God doesn't exist, how can you believe in an objective good or bad, right? If God does not exist, objective moral values can't exist. And here's why. Here's why I want to make that argument. Without some objective reference point, we have no way of saying that something is really up or down, right? If we don't know what's north, we don't know what's north and south. There's no objective reference point, such as the Christians would argue, that God's nature leads to love, truth, mercy, justice, holiness, and the like, for morality, then all we're left with is everyone's viewpoint of what is right and wrong. If we have no objective, this is true north of morality, all we are left with is what you think is moral, what I think is moral, what they think is moral. There's no objective morality. There is only subjective morality. All right? This is what we call subjective morality. It's just what we prefer. It's based on the subject. Atheists pick up on this too. Richard Dawkins, who's the most famous, you've probably heard of him. He says, in a world without God, there is, quote, no evil and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. He loves that phrase, pitiless. That's like his go-to word. He says this is true, right? If there's no God, there's no good, there's no evil, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. If atheism is true and God doesn't exist, there is no basis for objective morality, so there is no one or nothing that can lay moral obligation or duty upon you. And for the atheists, right, humans are just highly evolved animals, and animals have no moral obligation towards one another, right? So you're never going to see a tiger chase after a gazelle and stop and go, oh, I'm sorry, my moral obligation is that I can't eat you today. I've eaten too many, this is bad, right or wrong. Like, animals don't have right or wrong towards one another. It's all carnal. It's all based on necessity. It's all based on eat or be eaten, survive or die. The problem, though, is that good and bad, right and wrong do in fact exist. They do. Good and bad, right and wrong exist. Our moral experience of the world convinces us that morals do exist, right and wrong do exist. So if you ever use the phrase, that's not fair, that's not right, you are saying that objective morality exists. If somebody ever takes something from you and you say, hey, you can't take that, that's mine, that's not fair, you are saying objective morality exists. If somebody ever runs into your vehicle, hypothetically, and then drives away without stopping, you're saying, that's not right, that's not okay. You are saying objective morality exists. If you lose objective morality, you lose the right to be upset if someone harms you, someone steals from you, someone goes against you, because that can't be wrong if it was right for them, right? So if I go up to Taymon and I punch him in the face, right? And he has no sense of objective morality. He has no sense of right or wrong. He cannot say that that was wrong. Right? He can say I didn't like it. He can say it hurt, but he cannot impose his morality on me because it was right for me. I wanted to do it. Felt good to me. Based on my morals, it was an okay thing. You have no objective sense of morality, right? And here's the deal. We all know objective morality exists. How do we know that? Because we can say what is evil and what is right? Christian or not Christian, right? We can all say, Christian or not Christian, racism is evil. We can all say, Christian or not Christian, child sexual abuse is evil. We can all say, Christian or not Christian, slavery is evil, terrorism is evil, and on and on and on. Always wrong for anyone, everywhere, regardless of culture. So we all would argue more objective morality exists, right? But without God, we have no basis of that objective morality. Tracking? So let me kind of give you the summary, okay? Number one, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. If God does not exist, there is no reference point by which we would have objective moral values and duties. Second, objective moral values and duties do exist. We just said that. We have them. We're able to say this is evil, this is right, this is wrong, regardless of culture, regardless of environment, regardless of situation or circumstance. Terrorism is never right anywhere, ever. We would all agree on that, Christian or not, right? Murder, never right, ever, anywhere. We would all agree on that. Objective moral values and duties do exist. 3, therefore, God exists. Therefore, God exists. If God does not exist, there are no objective moral values. Objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. That's the moral argument. You lose, reject God. You lose, reject objective moral standards. AKA, you can tell anyone anything you want as far as what's right and what's wrong. Again, that only gets you to a theistic God. I'm not arguing all the way to a Christian God. I'm just saying that a God exists. All right. Number 2, the case of origin, design, and beauty. This is sort of a kind of hodgepodge collection. Most of them come from Alvin Plantinga via Tim Keller. Again, read those books. Making Sense of God, Reason for God. Here's what we want to answer with this case of origin, design, and beauty. We want to answer why we are here, both in purpose, why are we here, but also in design. Why are we here? That's what we're trying to answer in both. Why are we here, and why are we here? Get that? You get the inclination? You get that on the video? Number 1. Let me just track with me, guys. Just track with me. Y'all are like, this is making no sense. We get the moral one? We good? Do I need to go back to it? Feel good? All right, number 1. There is something rather than nothing. Right? There is something rather than nothing, right? There is something, right? We're in this room right now. There is something. Something exists. There is something. There is not nothing. There is something rather than nothing. This is often referred to as the cosmological argument, and here's kind of the 3 steps of that. 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. So nothing comes from nothing comes from nothing, right? Like something exists, it's because something caused it to exist. There is no nothing that comes from nothing. So 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause. Things don't come into being from nothing. 2, the universe began to exist. Why do we know the universe began to exist? Because we are living in the universe. Because we're here right now, dwelling, breathing, living, listening to me talk. 3, therefore, a cause of the universe exists. Whatever begins to exist has a cause, right? Things don't come into being from nothing. 2, the universe began to exist. Well, we know that because it exists. Therefore, a cause of the universe exists. Everything we know in this world is contingent. It comes from something else. Number 2. Y'all tracking? Everybody tracking? All right, cool. Number 2. Yeah. There's something rather than nothing is the main one. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe begins to exist or began to exist. Therefore, the universe has a cause. A cause of the universe exists. If it exists, something started it. Something exists. Therefore, something started it. That's kind of the summation of it. Isn't that an argument? It's not. So the argument is, therefore, God is what caused it to exist. Are you talking about God existing? Yes. Yes, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to the eternality. Yep. So what about God? He's eternal. Yes, we'll get to that. That's a good question. Number 2, we'll get to that. Number 2, the something we have can support life. The something we have can support life. So not only is there a something, and in order to have a something, you got to have a something, but the something we have can support life. Y'all tracking with me? This is making sense to everybody else with me? I told y'all. All right, just track with me. This will make sense. Track with me. This is called the fine-tuning argument, okay? Here's what this means. This is Francis Collins. It's a quote there on the bottom of that page. When you look from the perspective of a scientist at the universe, it looks as if we knew we were coming. There are 15 constants, gravitational constant, various constants about the strong and weak nuclear force, etc., that have precise values. If any one of those constants was off by even 1 part in a million, or in some cases by 1 part in a million, the universe could not have actually come to the point where we see it. Matter would not have been able to coalesce. There would have been no galaxy, stars, planets, or people, right? He says it could happen, a million in a million, right? It could happen, sure. Could it? Yes. Very unlikely. Here's an example that Alvin Plantinga uses to talk about it. A man is dealing poker, and he deals himself 20 straight hands of 4 aces in this poker game, right? He just is dealing, he keeps giving himself 4 aces, which if you don't know poker, that's the best hand. It's a very, very good hand. Is it technically possible that he is actually dealing himself 20 hands in a row, 4 aces? Technically, could he do that? Yes. Is it very likely that he would not, unless he is cheating? Yes, right? So that's the same argument with the universe. That's the same argument with this fine-tuning thing, right? It's technically possible that we are in a universe that was produced as perfectly as it is to sustain and create life. It's very, 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 very unlikely that that's actually what happened, right? Tracking? We good? Y'all looking at me with all the faces. Number 3. This front table. Y'all gotta move to the back. One more something. Number 1, there is something rather than nothing. Number 2, the something we have can support life. Number 3, the something we have is beautiful. The something we have is beautiful. This is often called the aesthetic argument, the argument of aesthetic. So not only does this something that we have support life, is perfectly wired scientifically to sustain and produce life, there is also meaning in that life. There's also beauty in that life. That we're not just a bunch of organisms, right? To put it this way, if we are the product of accidental natural forces, then what we call beauty, or what we call love, or what we call joy, are simply biochemical responses. That are only neurologically hardwired responses in our brain, right? But we don't believe that. As Christians, we don't believe that. We don't believe that the love that we have for one another, that the love that we have for each other as people, the love we have for our spouses, our children, whatever, we don't believe that that's just neurological hardwiring in our brains. Right? We believe that is God-given. That's the argument from aesthetic, that the something we have is beautiful. That our longing for love, longing for beauty, that when we go to the top of a mountain and we hike, people say, they gasp, right? You gasp when you're like, whoa, this is awesome. That is revealing something within you, a longing within you. This is how the Bible puts it, Ecclesiastes 3:11. God has put eternity into man's hearts. He's put a longing within our hearts for beauty, for love, for joy, that we're not just neurological impulses, right? That we have deep gnawing within us. Romans 1:20, we've gone back to Romans 1 a lot today. It says, for God's invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. There's this sense in which when we look at creation, Christian or not, we know there's something. We know there's something, and that something doesn't just produce life. It's not just scientifically right? It calls within us beauty and joy and life. Tracking? Cool.
Hey, I have a question that could be valid for some people, unless I'm just a dummy.
Sure.
But when we text questions in, do we need to put apologetics in front of the question, or do they need to be separate?
Put apologetics in front of the question. Yeah, that's a great question.
Wait, what?
Whenever you text in questions, just write apologetics and then the question.
Oh, what happens if you don't put apologetics?
It may have come through. We'll see. Number 3, third proof. So that gives you just a God, right? That just gives you like theistic concept of God. Let's talk about the Christian God. This is the reality of the resurrection. The reality of the resurrection, or the proof of the resurrection. Something important for y'all to know. Jesus wasn't killed because he healed people, or he fed people, or he took care of people. Jesus was killed because he claimed to be God. Jesus claimed to be God. This is why the religious leaders wanted to kill him. He claimed to be God. He was not simply a good teacher. He was not simply a prophet. He claimed deity, right? So, as C.S. Lewis says, that means as we respond to Jesus, he is either a liar, a lunatic, or Lord. One of the 3 options. If you were to take Jesus at his claims for himself, either he is a liar, he was manipulative, coercive, trying to just fake his way through. He was a lunatic. He was a crazy man claiming to be God, or he was actually who he says he was, which is God. So why would anyone believe he is actually God? Why would we believe he is not a lunatic or a liar? Well, it depends. Did Jesus actually rise from the dead? Right? If he actually rose from the dead, then his claim to be Son of God carries significant weight. If the resurrection actually happened, then Jesus may just be who he says he was. So let's look at the facts, and then we'll look at the explanation. Here's the facts of the resurrection. Fact number 1, the empty tomb of Christ. The empty tomb of Christ. 6 different sources from different times and different authors all talked about the empty tomb. I'll give you some verses. Luke 24, 1 through 12. John 20, 1 through 8. 1 Corinthians 15, 3 through 5. Mark 16, 1 through 8. Matthew 28, 1 through 10, Acts 2, 29 through 32. Like we talked about earlier with the Bible stuff, some of these sources were written 15 to 20 years after Jesus' death, saying the tomb is empty, Jesus is alive. Enough for folks, if they read it, to actually go check it out. Is it actually empty? And it's empty, right? That's a fact. You have historical writings as well, other accounts, non-biblical, ancient Jewish accounts about the empty tomb being empty, even by non-Christians. Also, the first people in the accounts, especially in Luke and in John, to report that the tomb was empty was women. And women's testimonies in that time were basically worthless. And so if they were trying to make this part of the story up, they would not have said that it was first put forth by women. That just not have been a detail they would want to include if they were making up the story. But they did, trying to show both, one, God's heart for women, and two, also how it actually happened. Fact number 2, the appearances of Jesus alive after his death. The appearances of Jesus alive after his death. Paul, back in 1 Corinthians 15, he provides a list of witnesses to Jesus' resurrection. He talks about Cephas, he talks about James, he talks about the 12, the apostles, 500 brothers, all of these people that Jesus appeared to. And then he says most of whom are still alive, which we already looked at. And so there's these evidences of Jesus making appearances to over 500 people at one time after his death. All right, that's just factual. We have recordings on it. We have writings on it. So these are just facts. We're not talking about the interpretation of the facts, just the facts. 1, the tomb was empty. We have record and reason to believe that. 2, the appearances of Jesus, that he did appear to people alive after his death. Fact number 3, the disciples' belief in the resurrection. The disciples' belief in the resurrection. Immediately after Jesus' death, all of his followers scatter. Right? They go their separate ways. They run, they hide, they're fleeing, they're afraid, they're scared, right? They have no concept for their Messiah dying on a cross. And then, just a short while later, they start preaching the gospel and Christianity explodes. How do you account for that, right? Well, they believed the resurrection. N.T. Wright, a New Testament theologian, says it this way. He says, that is why, as a historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. Right? Because the disciples suddenly have this power. They suddenly care. All right? We're not saying whether it actually happened or not. We're not talking about the explanation of it. We're just saying they at least said over and over and over and over and over again, Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. Jesus is alive. The disciples believed Jesus is alive, so much so that they were willing to die for it. All right, that's the facts. Right? Fact number 1, empty tomb. Fact number 2, appearances of Jesus, over 500 people after his death. Fact number 3, the disciples believe in the resurrection. Now, in light of that, there's some explanations. Let's talk about some of the different explanations, all of which are false. I'm just going to tell you up front, I am at you. I'll tell you why. The first is the conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory. So we're trying to explain these 3 facts. The first is the conspiracy theory. This is that the disciples faked the resurrection. They faked it. Didn't actually happen. Most likely, they took the body somewhere. They did something with it. It's all fake. They faked the resurrection. They faked his appearances. It's all just one big conspiracy. Really big evidence for why this is not true is very rarely are people willing to die for a conspiracy, right? They would make something up and then all go to their grave for it. That's hard to believe, right? Maybe. That's a deep conspiracy if so, right? You don't die for something you faked like this. No scholar, liberal or conservative, Christian or not, defends this theory. Like, even the ones who are anti-resurrection, none of them defend this theory. None of them say it's a conspiracy. They have a few other theories, which we'll talk about now. Second theory, the apparent death theory. The apparent death theory. Jesus was crucified. He did get put in the grave, but he revived in the tomb. And he managed to escape, and then he convinced his disciples he had risen from the dead. So it's an apparent death. He didn't actually die. He was kind of passed out for a while. Once he got in the tomb, he resuscitated. He was good to go, got himself out of the tomb. Couple things. One, this was medically impossible. The Romans were expert executioners. Like, they just knew how to execute criminals. That was just what they did. That's what they were known for. The torture was so extensive that it is basically impossible that Jesus would have still been alive. Everything from his 39, one short of 40, which was the deathly amount of lashes, to his death on the cross, to them stabbing him in the side, all of that, it's basically medically impossible. Also, when Jesus comes out of the tomb, he is gloriously risen, right? So when he appears to Mary and Martha, like the accounts, when he shows up in the behind the door to his disciples, he's not like barely breathing, right? He's alive. Right? He's walking around, he's talking to him, he's walking on the road. Like, he's not barely scraping his way back from the brink of death, right? Gloriously risen and barely alive crawling out of the tomb are 2 different things. And we get the picture of gloriously risen. That's the second theory, conspiracy, apparent death. Third theory is the displaced body theory. The displaced body theory. This is the idea that Joseph of Arimathea, who Jesus was put in his tomb, placed him there temporarily, and then later went back and moved him to another tomb without telling anybody. That's why the tomb is empty. Like Joseph went, wrong tomb. I need this one for my family, and just kind of moved it. Couple reasons why this wouldn't be true or accurate. First, Jewish laws prohibited moving a corpse after it was placed in a tomb, except to a family tomb. So Joseph of Arimathea was a devout Jew. He would have known this is anti-going. I should not do this. This is against the Jewish law to go move a body after it's buried. Second, Joseph was alive and never corrected the preaching of the resurrection. Peter's not up in Acts chapter 2. Holy Spirit comes on him. He's like, you killed Jesus, but he rose again. And Joseph of Arimathea is not in the back going, that's not true. I moved him. Didn't do it. Number 4, the hallucination theory. The hallucination theory. The disciples didn't really see Jesus. They just imagined it because they were so full of grief and sadness. It wasn't actually physically Jesus. They were just so torn up, so in grief by this Messiah they wanted to be God that they just hallucinated all of it. A couple reasons why this one's not likely. First, Jesus appeared many times to hundreds of people in vastly different places, to believers and non-believers, to individuals and to groups as large as 500. It's hard to have that type of mass hallucination. It just is. Second, it doesn't explain the bodily resurrection that they teach and we believe. It doesn't explain, hey, Thomas, put your fingers in my hands, touch my toes, see it. It also doesn't explain the empty tomb, right? If they're just hallucinating that Jesus got up from the grave, the tomb would still be full. And we know that the facts are the tomb is empty. So it doesn't appear it'd be mass hallucinations, that'd be wild. It doesn't explain the bodily resurrection they teach and believe. It doesn't explain the empty tomb. So, in light of those 4 theories, that leaves us with just maybe it being true that Jesus did, in fact, bodily, gloriously resurrect from the dead. Right? That if the facts are that, there's no good theory explanations, it just might be true. And here's the deal. If God exists, why isn't the resurrection possible? Right? If God actually exists, why isn't the resurrection possible? And I love this quote from Peter Slezak. He's a atheist philosophy of science professor. He says this. He says, for a God who is able to create the entire universe, the odd resurrection would be child's play. He says, if God was able to create all things, then just a little resurrection, that'd be child's play. But we trust that he's done both.